He slid into the driver's seat of his old Honda Civic, hands still shaking from the fight. The heater was on full blast, but the chill in his chest wouldn't warm up. He pressed his forehead against the cool steering wheel and closed his eyes, trying to push away the echo of harsh words. The street outside was quiet, save for the distant hum of a passing truck and the soft flicker of a street lamp. He didn't want to go back inside yet. The walls felt like they were closing in, and every shadow reminded him of what happened moments ago. He took a slow, steadying breath and looked at the rearview mirror. His reflection was pale, eyes red, jaw clenched. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and ran his fingers through his hair, feeling the graying strands catch between his fingers. He remembered the argument. Voices raised, doors slammed, hurtful things neither of them could take back. The memory twisted in his chest, reminding him that pride and stubbornness had carried him straight out of the house and into this cramped car. He glanced at the passenger seat, where a half-empty coffee cup spilled its bitter contents onto the floor mat. He reached down and untangled his foot from the seatbelt buckle, then leaned over and picked up the cup. The coffee smelled stale, but he took a modest sip anyway, hoping the caffeine would calm his nerves. Instead, he felt the familiar knot of regret tighten in his gut. He set the cup back down and braced himself. He knew he couldn't stay here forever. Outside, the world was waking. A pale orange glow crept over the horizon, coloring the sky in soft pastels. He took another deep breath, focusing on the cool morning air filling his lungs. He told himself that going back inside didn't mean he had lost. It meant he cared enough to face the mess he'd made. He shook his head as if to clear it, and started the engine. The familiar rumble made him flinch, but it also reminded him of every road he had driven to fix things in his life, every mile earned, every detour taken to make amends. He shifted the car into drive and rolled forward, tires crunching on gravel. Each bump in the road felt like a test, but he pressed on. As he approached the driveway, he practiced what he would say. A simple apology, no excuses, just honesty. He thought of his son's face when he watched them from the stairs, arms crossed, eyes tired. He hated that he had put his child through this, that his anger had become their late-night story. He promised himself right then that he would do better. When the front porch came into view, he parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat there for a moment. The house looked unchanged. The old welcome mat, the potted plant by the door, the curtains drawn tight. He reached over and turned off the heater, letting the chill seep in again. It was uncomfortable, but he welcomed it. Discomfort meant he was alive, ready to face the consequences. He opened the door, feeling the cold air rush in, and stepped out, hands in his pockets. He lifted his gaze to the porch light and knew that whatever happened next, this was his starting point. No more running, no more hiding, just the hard work of setting things right. He sat on the bottom step of the porch, the morning air crisp against his skin. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, and stared at the driveway where his car still sat. The engine was off, but the headlights hadn't come on until he switched them off himself. He closed his eyes and let the silence settle around him, broken only by the distant chirp of birds greeting the new day. After a minute, he heard the soft crunch of gravel behind him. He opened his eyes and watched a young boy riding his bike slowly toward the house. The boy wore a plain white shirt and jeans, hair tousled by the breeze. He pedaled without urgency, as if he were exploring the neighborhood rather than heading somewhere with purpose. The boy stopped at the bottom of the steps and propped his bike against the railing. He looked up at the man, tilting his head as though trying to remember if he had seen him before. The man studied the boy's face too, familiar but distant. He realized the boy was a neighbor's son, someone he'd waved to a few times but never spoken with. "You okay?" the boy asked, his voice gentle, curious. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of someone who noticed more than he let on. The man nodded, forcing a small smile. "I will be," he said, his voice low. "Just needed a minute." The boy shifted his weight, glancing down at the broken coffee cup still in the man's coat pocket. "That fight last night was loud," he said. "I could hear it from my room." The man closed his eyes and winced. He'd hoped the walls would muffle the noise. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that." The boy shrugged as if understanding that some things just happened. "People fight," he said, "but it still hurts to hear." The man looked at the boy, surprised by the honesty. He saw something in those young eyes, a mix of judgment and compassion that reminded him how children absorb everything around them. He took a deep breath and leaned back against the doorframe, folding his arms across his chest. "I know," he said after a moment. "I'm trying to get better at this, at controlling my anger." The boy nodded again, then leaned down to pick up his bike. "Well," he said, pushing the pedals to lift it, "my dad yells sometimes too, but he always comes back and says he's sorry." The man watched as the boy swung a leg over the seat and started to pedal away. The boy paused at the gate, looking back once more. "Don't worry," he called. "You'll figure it out." The man stood up and stepped onto the driveway, watching the boy's retreating figure. The neighborhood had fully woken now. Cars rolled down the street. A mail carrier approached the next house, and somewhere a dog barked. He realized he felt lighter than he had in days, as if acknowledging his mistakes and hearing forgiveness, even from a child, had lifted some of the weight off his shoulders. He walked over to his car and retrieved the coffee cup, setting it on the ground so it wouldn't tip over. Then he turned and walked back toward the house, resolve strengthening with each step. Inside, his son might be waiting for him, with questions or with quiet, but he knew he wouldn't face it alone. He had taken the first step toward making things right, and that was something he could build on. He walked down the driveway toward his car, still feeling the weight of the morning's exchange with the neighbor's son. He unlocked the door and slid into the driver's seat, closing it with a soft click. He rested his hands on the steering wheel, fingers tracing the warm leather, and stared out at the quiet street. Everything looked normal, but he knew the day would not be the same. As he reached for the ignition, he noticed movement across the road. A white boy, maybe in his late teens, was riding by on a skateboard. The boy slowed and glanced over at him. There was no malice in his eyes, but there was a hint of something else. Judgment, perhaps, or simply blunt honesty. "You always had anger issues, didn't you?" The boy called out, voice steady and casual. He leaned on his skateboard, waiting for a response. The man paused, hands gripping the wheel tighter. He swallowed hard, trying to steady his voice before speaking. "Maybe," he admitted. "I'm working on it." The boy nodded as if he understood more than he let on. He tapped the board with his foot and continued, "Everyone's heard you yelling last night. I could hear it from 2 houses down." The man felt a flicker of embarrassment burn in his cheeks. He had hoped to keep his son's fights private, but sound traveled fast in a quiet neighborhood. He looked away for a moment, focusing on the pattern of cracks in the pavement. "Look," the boy said, "people get angry, but it's on you to control it." He paused, then added, "You owe it to your kid to keep it together." The man nodded slowly. He realized the boy was right. His anger had become a burden not only for his family, but for everyone nearby. He inhaled deeply, the smell of asphalt and morning dew filling his nostrils. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for the noise. I didn't mean to disturb anyone." The boy shrugged, pushing off with one foot to speed up. "Just be careful," he said over his shoulder. "Anger can stick to you like dirt." Then he skated away, the wheels humming against the pavement. The man watched him go, feeling both chastened and strangely grateful. The boy's blunt words stung, but they also reminded him of why he needed to change. He turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. For a moment, he hesitated, letting the sound echo through the car. He thought of his son curled up on the stairs back home, wondering how the rest of his day would go. He thought of all the mornings he had spent proud and hopeful, and how easily one fight could tarnish those memories. He placed his foot on the gas, easing the car forward. Each meter he moved felt like a choice, a chance to prove that he could do better. He drove slowly, passing neat lawns and parked cars, until he reached the corner where the white boy had skated past. He stopped for a moment, looking back down the street, imagining the boy's silhouette disappearing around a bend. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I'll try harder." When he opened them again, he saw the sun fully above the rooftops, bathing the world in pale gold. It felt like a signal, a new beginning disguised as another ordinary day. He shifted the car into gear and headed for work, carrying the boy's words in his mind, determined not to let them go to waste. He walked into the small auto parts shop where he worked, the bell over the door jingling softly behind him. He set his keys on the counter and ran a hand through his hair, still unsettled by the morning's encounters. The store was quiet, with rows of metal shelves lined with boxes of spark plugs, filters, and brake pads. He nodded to his coworker, Maria, who was sorting through inventory. "Morning," Maria said, her tone neutral but friendly. She glanced at him, noticing the tension in his shoulders. "Everything okay?" He managed a nod. "Just a rough morning," he replied, unloading a cardboard box onto the counter. The smell of rubber and oil filled the air, oddly comforting in its familiarity. As he organized parts, his mind kept drifting back to the neighborhood boys. Their candid words echoed in his head, reminding him of his faults. He picked up a new set of brake pads and inspected them, trying to focus on the task. The shop's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the faint radio played a country song about finding second chances. When a customer entered, the man's voice startled him. "I need a new air filter for a 2010 Honda," the customer said. He nodded and led the man to the appropriate section. As he explained the filter's specifications, he realized how far he had come in keeping calm under pressure. Last year, a similar interaction might have ended in a slammed door or a sharp word. Today, he explained patiently, demonstrating the filter and offering tips on installation. After the customer left, Maria leaned on the counter. "You handled that well," she observed. He shrugged. "I'm trying," he said softly, "trying to keep it together." Maria offered a small smile. "It shows. Just remember, everyone slips sometimes. It's what you do next that counts." He appreciated her understanding. Later, during his lunch break, he sat in his car in the parking lot. He opened a brown bag with a sandwich and apple, but ate slowly, eyes distant. He pulled out his phone and saw a missed call from his daughter's school. Anxiety spiked in his chest. He tapped the message app and read, "David, your son fell at recess. He's okay but cut his knee. We cleaned and bandaged it. Call when you can." Relief washed over him, mixed with guilt. He should have checked his phone earlier. He dialed the school's number and confirmed his son was stable and in good spirits despite the scrape. Maria's words replayed in his mind. It's what you do next that counts. He realized he needed to be more present. He told the school secretary he would pick his son up after work and hung up. The rest of the afternoon passed in a focused blur. Each task, sorting orders, filling shelves, ringing up sales, became a choice to stay calm, to prove to himself that he could move past his anger. He glanced at the clock. 2 hours until closing. With every minute, he felt more in control. When the final customer left and the shop's door locked with a click, he took a deep breath. He said goodbye to Maria, who gave him an encouraging nod. He grabbed his jacket and headed to the parking lot, sunlight fading into the late afternoon sky. He started the car and drove toward his son's school, determination settling in his chest. Today he would show up, calm, attentive, and ready to make things right. He pulled into the school parking lot just as the afternoon bell rang. Parents and children moved through the lot like slow currents in a river. He scanned for his son's small frame, backpack swinging, and spotted him near the school entrance. The boy waved excitedly, his scraped knee bandaged but still red. The man cut the engine, stepped out, and wrapped his son in a quick hug. The boy laughed, then pointed to the car. "Daddy, can you drive me home?" he asked, voice bright. The man opened the passenger door for his son and buckled him in. As he walked around to the driver's side, he felt a familiar knot in his chest loosen. The day's weight was lifting. He slid into the seat, starting the engine, and watched his son settle in. They rolled out of the parking lot, the engine humming a steady rhythm. Outside, the neighborhood looked quiet, front yards sprinkled with flowering shrubs, and kids riding bikes on sidewalks. A few minutes into the drive, the boy spoke up. "I told my friend about you staying in the car this morning," he said, eyes on the road ahead. He said, "That's serious, man." The man glanced in the rearview mirror, catching his son's curious gaze. He smiled gently. "Sometimes grown-ups need space to think," he said. "But I didn't want you to worry." The boy nodded, then looked out the window as they passed a row of maple trees. Just then, his phone buzzed with a notification. The screen lit up with a message. "If you enjoy honest stories, don't forget to subscribe for more." The man glanced down, surprised by the timing. He chuckled, then showed the screen to his son. The boy laughed too. "Subscribe," he repeated. "Like for YouTube." The man tapped the notification, closing it. "Yeah," he said. "Someone thinks our morning counts as an honest story." His son giggled, then leaned forward to pretend he was filming. "Subscribe, click the bell," he teased, mimicking a popular video host. The man laughed along, feeling a lightness he hadn't felt in days. The simple joke made him realize how small moments, from a neighbor's boy offering kindness to a random subscribe line, could shift his mood. He glanced back at his son, whose eyes were bright with mischief. "Ready for ice cream?" he asked, turning onto their street. The boy's eyes lit up. "Yes," he said, punching the air playfully. They drove the last block in comfortable silence, the city's late afternoon glow bathed across the dashboard. When they reached home, the boy hopped out and raced ahead, leaving the man to gather his own things. He paused at the curb, taking a steadying breath. The subscribe message replayed in his mind, reminding him that life stories, honest, messy, hopeful, deserve to be shared. He walked up the steps to the front door, son scampering ahead. He unlocked it, then paused inside, listening to the faint hum of daily life. He knew there would be challenges ahead, more fights to resolve, more mistakes to own. But after this morning, after today's small victories and a random subscribe reminder, he felt ready to keep moving forward. He closed the door behind him, determined to build on each honest moment. He followed his son into the kitchen, where the fluorescent light hummed overhead. The boy opened the freezer door and pulled out 2 ice cream bars, his eyes bright with excitement. The man closed the door behind him and leaned against the counter, watching. The air smelled faintly of vanilla and morning coffee. "Here," the boy said, handing 1 bar to his father. He bit into his own, the cold sweetness making him grin. The man unwrapped his slowly, the chocolate shell cracking under his teeth. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the taste. It felt good to share something so simple, something untouched by anger or regret. "Thank you," he said, ruffling the boy's hair. The boy shrugged, then licked melting chocolate from his fingers. "Dad, are you going to be okay?" he asked, voice small. The man straightened up, surprise in his chest. His son's concern felt heavy and tender all at once. "I will be," he replied, pulling out a chair and sitting at the kitchen table. The boy slid in beside him. "I'm working on it," the man explained. "Every day, I want to do better." He watched the boy take another bite, then meet his gaze in the table's reflection. "You did good today," the boy said after a moment, speaking around his ice cream. "You came back and got me. You talked to Maria at work nicely. You're trying." The man's throat tightened. Praise from his child felt stronger than any reprimand. "Thanks, buddy," he managed. He set the wrapper aside and placed both hands on the table. "You know," he continued, "sometimes I feel like I have a huge storm inside me. Anger builds up like thunder, and I scare myself too." He paused, searching for the right words. "But I don't want that storm to hurt you." The boy nodded solemnly. "Storms pass," the boy said quietly. "And sometimes there's a rainbow." The man blinked, touched by the boy's simple wisdom. He reached out and took his son's hand. The kitchen clock ticked in the quiet, each second stretching between them. "Let's go outside," he suggested, standing and pulling the boy up. They stepped into the backyard, where the grass was still damp from morning dew. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves of a small maple tree. The boy pointed up at a single bird perched on a branch. "Look," the boy whispered, "someone's singing." The The man listened. The bird's call was clear and bright. He inhaled the fresh air and felt tension loosen in his shoulders. He realized how much he had needed this moment. Ice cream, backyard, bird call, his son's hand in his. "Hey," the boy said, tugging on his sleeve, "can we plant flowers here?" He pointed to a patch of bare earth by the fence. The man smiled, surprised by the boy's sudden enthusiasm. "Sure," he said. "We'll plant something." Excitement lit the boy's face. They went back inside and gathered a small packet of marigold seeds in a trowel. Kneeling side by side in the dirt, they dug holes and dropped seeds, covering them gently. The boy hummed as he worked. The man found himself humming too, letting the rhythm soothe him. When they finished, he stood and dusted his hands on his jeans. He looked at the row of small seeds resting in the earth, seeds that needed care and patience to grow. He glanced at his son, who gave him a proud thumbs up. The man knew that, like these seeds, his effort to change required daily tending. And with his boy by his side, he felt ready to nurture something new and hopeful. He woke before sunrise and slipped quietly into the kitchen, careful not to wake his son. The night air was cool, and the dead light from the street lamp filtered through the window. He filled the kettle and set it on the stove, then reached into the cabinet for 2 mugs. Steam curled up as the water boiled, and he measured coffee grounds out of habit, though he knew his son would not join him for a morning cup. He sat at the table with a notebook and a pen, reviewing the math problems his son had struggled with the night before. He traced the numbers in the notebook and practiced each step, reminding himself how long it had been since he'd helped with homework. When the clock clicked 6:30, he heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up as his son padded into the kitchen, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning," the father said softly, pushing the notebook across the table. "Want to go over your homework before school?" The boy yawned but sat down, pulling a pencil from his pocket. Together, they worked through fractions and long division. The boy hesitated at one problem, biting his lip, and the father leaned forward, pointing to each line of work and explaining patiently. When the boy solved it correctly, he grinned and punched the air. The father returned the smile, pride warming his chest. After homework, they prepared breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast. The father cracked eggs into a bowl and whisked them, while his son buttered the bread. The kitchen smelled of egg and baked grain. They ate quietly at first, then the boy asked, "Dad, can we go to the park after school today?" The father nodded. "Absolutely," he said. "We'll ride our bikes." The boy's eyes lit up. "And can we bring seeds for the garden?" He added, remembering yesterday's planting. The father laughed softly. "Of course. We'll pick more marigolds and maybe some sunflowers." They cleared the dishes, and the boy ran to get his backpack. The father hugged him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his son's shoulders. "Have a good day," he said. "I'll see you at 3. The boy waved and headed out the door, the porch light clicking off behind him. The father watched him go, then grabbed his own bag and headed out for work. On the way, he stopped at a small nursery and chose packets of bright sunflower seeds and purple zinnia seeds. The shopkeeper wrapped them in brown paper, as the father thought of the row of tiny marigolds in his backyard, waiting to bloom. At work, he moved through his tasks with a focused calm. When a machine jammed and a customer grew impatient, he spoke in measured tones, resolving the issue without frustration. Each small success reminded him he was capable of change. When the clock turned 3, he shut down his station early and jumped on his bike. The ride to the park was brisk, wind tugging at his jacket. He arrived to find his son waiting by the gate, sunflower seeds clutched in his hand. Together, they pedaled through the park until they reached an open plot near a picnic table. They spread out the seeds in neat lines, pressing each one gently into the soil. The boy hummed a tune as he worked, and the father hummed along, feeling a lightness he hadn't felt in months. When they finished, they stood back and admired the neat rows of seeds. "We'll water them every day," the father said. His son nodded eagerly. The father put an arm around his shoulder. "Today was a good day," he said simply. The boy leaned into him and smiled. And in that quiet moment among fresh earth and afternoon light, the father knew their bond was growing stronger. One seed, one shared moment at a time. He and his son walked back home as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The boy rode his bike, pedals spinning smoothly, while the father walked beside him, holding a small watering can filled at a nearby faucet. They paused at the edge of their front yard, where yesterday's marigolds and today's sunflowers and zinnias stood in neat rows of bare earth waiting to sprout. The boy knelt by the marigolds and poured water gently over the seeds, droplets soaked into the soil, disappearing almost instantly. The father bent down to help with the sunflowers, making sure each plant got a careful drink. "We'll check on them every morning," he said. The boy nodded, brushing a strand of hair from his face as he looked up at the fading light. They stood, and the father reached into his coat pocket, pulling out 2 small flashlights he bought at the hardware store earlier. "Ready for our nightly patrol?" he asked with a grin. The boy laughed and took one flashlight. Together, they swept the yard, making sure the garden was safe from falling leaves and curious insects. When they finished, the father clicked off the flashlight and led his son inside. The house was quiet, only the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. He took off his jacket and hung it by the door, then turned to find his son standing still in the hallway. The boy looked up at him, eyes thoughtful. "Dad," the boy said softly, "thanks for today." The father crouched down, placing both hands on his son's shoulders. "Thank you," he replied, "for sticking with me." The boy smiled, and it was an honest, easy curve of the mouth, the kind his father hadn't seen in too long. They walked into the living room and sat on the couch. The father picked up a small photo frame from the coffee table, a picture of them at the beach last summer, both of them laughing as waves crashed around their ankles. He handed the frame to his son. "Remember this day?" he asked. The boy nodded and traced the edge of the photo with his finger. "That was fun," he said. "Can we do it again?" The father set the frame back down and put an arm around his son's shoulders. "We will," he promised. "We'll make new memories." The boy leaned into him, and the father rested his chin on the top of his head, breathing in the comforting scent of his son's hair. Later, they moved to the kitchen to prepare a simple dinner: grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. The father stirred the soup while the boy buttered the bread slices. They worked quietly, but the air between them was warm. As they ate, the boy chattered about his day, how he had shown his friend the seeds they planted, how he hoped the flowers would bloom soon. After dinner, the boy grabbed his backpack and headed for the stairs. The father followed, switching on the hallway light. At the top, the boy paused by his bedroom door. "Good night, Dad," he said. The father leaned down to kiss his son's forehead. "Good night, kiddo," he replied softly. He watched his son disappear behind the door, then leaned against the banister for a moment, reflecting on the day's journey from a fight overheard in the night to shared ice cream, garden seeds, and honest talks. He felt a quiet pride. He had faced his anger, listened to others' wisdom, and chosen to keep trying. With that resolve, he turned and walked back downstairs. The house was still except for the soft ticking of the living room clock. He knew tomorrow held new challenges, but he also knew he would meet them with patience and care. And as he switched off the last light and headed to bed himself, he carried with him the gentle certainty that change began with each small, sincere step.